Hi, everybody. Welcome to my brief demo, which is doing an overview of how you would launch a web-based application from a server in the cloud. And in particular, I'm going to be talking about Google's cloud platform, GCP. So to start, this is going to be the case regardless of where your hosting server is. But you're going to want to set up a GitHub repo that has the materials and the files specifically necessary for your app to function correctly and launch in a runtime environment when you want it to. So one important thing, this is first just a repo that I made for this application. As you can see, it's for a class I'm taking at Duke University. And for the app in particular, we look at the make file. You can have an automated file called a make file, which will run certain sets of commands that you would like it to. And so right now I have the make file set up to do an install of the requirements.txt text, which is also in my repo. And for all of those Python packages specifically to be downloaded with pip into the local environment so that the app can launch correctly and have all of the requisite packages available. And I also have a lint feature here as well to lint the main.py file that I have, which has kind of the main parts of my app in it. So if we go back and we looked at the make file, we also have packages and functions that the application itself will need. And specifically what we need to denote for a really simple application, like the one that I'm showing, is just to denote what type of Python version we want at runtime. We also have to have a cloud build YAML file, which essentially is necessary for our app files to be able to be built and launched in a runtime on the Google Cloud Platform. The main.py file is the main file in which we will be writing our application. And in particular, there's different packages and frameworks for writing applications in Python. The one we're going to use today is a really nice, easy to use, lightweight package called Flask. So as you can see in this file, all we're doing is naming an instance from the class Flask. And specifically, then we are using that instance of app that we've called as an object. And for just the sake of doing this demo, we just have a really simple function that we're running when the file main.py is called. And so we're going to have a little bit of text. And we're also signifying at the app's runtime what the host and port IP addresses are. So if we go back to the main repo, we're pretty much done. We have requirements, and right now we just have it really simply filled out with Flask. You can always, if you have a local environment that you're working in, you can always essentially just examine the packages that you've installed into the environment, and you can always update that in your requirements.txt. So now that we have a repo built with the application, if we move over to Google Cloud Platform, you'll want to set up a new project for your application. So that's if you go up to the top drop-down bar, you can see the different projects that exist on your Google account. And so we'll want to, I already set up this project. And so now we have the project. We get the project name, project ID, project number. And now if we want to, so I've already spun up when I set up the project, you set up an instance, compute instance. And so when we use the shell now, we're communicating with the computing instance that is set up with the initial project. So now when I go over to my Cloud Shell, it's a nice interface because we have the console and terminal, and then we also have a text editor, which kind of makes it a more robust IDE. So the first thing that we would do over in this environment would be making sure that we're using the environments for the project specifically, and you can see that here with Cloud Comp Project 1. The next thing then, once we've set things up, is we will want to make sure you're connected. So actually this is a good example of being disconnected. So we'll want to make sure we are connected to the right project ID. So if we go back, we would want to get the project ID from right here on our dashboard for that project. And we're going to want to make sure then that, as you can see, now we're specifically within the virtual environment for that project. So as you can see then, we have, if you were just starting this from scratch, you wouldn't have another directory here. But since I have already git cloned my repo from GitHub, you can see it here now as Cloud Comp Project 1. The other thing we would want to do is generate our key to essentially allow our new server that we're on through Google Cloud Platform to be able to exchange information via SSH with GitHub. So we would go through this process. I've already retrieved this key, so I'm not going to overwrite it. But once you generate that SHA hash, then you would go back to GitHub here. You would go up to your settings, and then you would go to SSH. And as you can see, I've already put in the key here, the Cloud Comp key. All right. So now if we go back to our shell and we imagine that we did a git pull from our repo, go into our project, and then we can see our files here based on the files that we had in our repository. And then the next thing we'll want to do once we have all the files is we'll want to use the gcloud app deploy. We'll say continue. As you can see, then it shows essentially that your app is being deployed, and this is checking through essentially all of the files we've created in our repo and that we have on the local server as well. And sometimes you just have to wait a little bit for this to finish. While that's going to, just a reminder that we can view each of these files up here in the IDE. And so we could make the appropriate changes if we wanted to. If we didn't want to use a text editor like Vim or Emacs, we could make changes up here and then save them. So as you can see, we are almost there. This is actually going to take a little bit less time than it did the first time I actually deployed So it can take a couple minutes the first time you're actually deploying your app. So now it tells us that we can view our application in a web browser. So we'll give that a try, just using the commands. So it didn't detect a browser, but it gives us this URL link. So I clicked on that, and this is the information that I had put into main.py. So we could, you can obviously then build out a more sophisticated app, have a more sophisticated front end, but for the purpose of this demo, I just wanted to show you that you could get to this point and deploy your app. One other thing to note is that if you want your app to eventually and your app's repo to be part of a continuous delivery, continuous integration pipeline model, we can also go over to cloud build. So just to show you, let's say we were just kind of on the main home page for Google Cloud Platform. We could go to cloud build, and then this would take you to your applications that are running in the project that you have selected. So we're in the same project, and we can set up triggers then. So if you click on triggers in this setting, you can do create trigger, and then you can go through and you can fill out the specifications you want. I had previously filled out a trigger, and it was very simple. I just used auto detected. So those are kind of the specs, and then you have the connected repo here as well. And then to test it, you also have to make sure the status is enabled, and then you can test by running the trigger. And this will populate and say the build started on the branch that you selected. Mine's master branch, so we'll show this process. And you can now see the build environment and the processes happening that are actually launching your application. So this is a summary going on about the build. It's called the build log, and it's a nice place to see where certain errors are in your setup during the actual execution of the build. So you can debug accordingly then based on that log. And we'll wait just a little bit to see how this worked. And essentially then, just kind of for future reference, the trigger can be used for deploying and making calls to your application, and doing that in more of an automated way. So now, as you can see, we were successful, and so we were able to deploy the app using a trigger, which again was in cloud build, which can be found on the Google Cloud Platform. All right, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the brief overview of how to deploy a Flask application on the Google Cloud Platform. If you have more questions, feel free to visit the associated GitHub repo. My handle is drwitt, and if you go to the Cloud Comp Project 1, you'll be able to view these files, and I'll keep them as a public repo so that you could copy contents from the files and potentially use them to stand up your own application on GCP. All right, take care.